British, May 3, 1945. Shimizu Naval Command, Japan. Captain Akiko Yamashita pressed her trembling fingers against the cold glass of the observation tower, watching in disbelief as the pride of the Imperial Navy sat motionless in Crimson Harbor like steel coffins floating on cursed water. 7 destroyers, 3 heavy cruisers, and 2 battleships, vessels that had terrorized the Pacific for 4 years, now refused to leave their own sanctuary because American aircraft had somehow transformed Japan's most fortified waters into an invisible graveyard. In just 28 days, unmarked B-29 Superfortresses flying alone in the darkness had accomplished what Admiral Halsey's entire Third Fleet couldn't achieve: the complete psychological and tactical defeat of the Japanese Navy through a weapon so insidious that it would claim more tonnage than Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Philippine Sea combined, all without firing a single conventional shot. The first impossible report reached Captain Yamashita's desk at 0347 hours on April 5, 1945, delivered by a communications officer whose hands shook so violently he could barely salute. The heavy cruiser Shiranui, flagship of the 7th Cruiser Division, had exploded while moored at Pier 7 in Crimson Harbor, the most secure naval facility in the Japanese Empire, protected by a double ring of submarine nets, underwater detection arrays, and the most sophisticated coastal defense system in the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Rei Matsumoto, the harbor's chief of operations, and one of only 3 women to hold such a position in the Imperial Navy, had been conducting her routine midnight inspection when the night sky erupted in orange flame. Her official report, written in the precise calligraphy that had earned her recognition at the Naval Academy, contained words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. 0347 hours. Shiranui destroyed by underwater explosion of unknown origin. No enemy aircraft detected by radar. No submarine contacts reported by sonar. No torpedo wakes observed by watch personnel. Casualty count: 387 officers and crew presumed dead. Request immediate investigation by Naval Intelligence. Within 18 hours, similar reports flooded the communication centers of naval bases across the Japanese archipelago. The destroyer Kazehana had disintegrated while departing Wakaba Harbor, taking with her Captain Michiko Sato and 201 crew members. The light cruiser Tsukiyakari had vanished in a pillar of fire while anchoring in Mizuho Bay, claiming the life of her commander, Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, who had been preparing for her promotion to full commander the following week. Chief Petty Officer Hanako Fujiwara, a veteran radar operator at the Shimotsuki Monitoring Station, compiled the most comprehensive early analysis of what the press would later call the ghost ship phenomenon. Her classified report to Admiral Kenji Nakamura, Supreme Commander of Home Waters Defense, included a chilling observation. Pattern analysis suggests systematic targeting of command vessels. Enemy demonstrates precise knowledge of fleet dispositions, officer rotation schedules, and harbor security procedures. Recommend immediate assumption that all naval communications have been compromised. The geographic spread of the attacks defied conventional military logic. Vessels were dying simultaneously in harbors separated by hundreds of kilometers. Akatsuki Naval Base in the north, Midori Harbor in central Honshu, and Shirokaze Bay in the southern islands. No known weapon system could coordinate such precise, simultaneous attacks across such vast distances. Commander Sayuri Ishikawa, chief analyst for the Naval Intelligence Division, worked 18-hour days attempting to identify patterns in the chaos. Her breakthrough came when she overlaid attack locations with tide charts, moon phases, and weather reports. The attacks weren't random. They followed a mathematical precision that suggested advanced technological coordination. The enemy is not simply attacking our ships, they are conducting a systematic experiment, testing variables we don't yet understand. Each attack provides them data for the next. We are not fighting a conventional naval engagement. We are serving as test subjects for a new form of warfare. The hidden weapon revealed. 1 to 2:30. What Commander Ishikawa and the entire Japanese naval establishment didn't know was that Colonel Jennifer Steele Morrison of the 77th Bombardment Wing had been conducting the most sophisticated mining operation in military history. Operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Morrison commanded a specialized squadron of B-29 Superfortresses equipped with the AN-APS-15 precision targeting radar and carrying what Navy engineers called thinking mines, explosive devices that contained more computing power than most Japanese warships. The operation, designated Kraken's Net in classified American documents, had been conceived by Dr. Catherine Wells, a former MIT professor now serving as the Navy's Chief of Underwater Warfare Development. Dr. Wells had spent 2 years studying captured Japanese naval architecture, analyzing steel compositions, engine frequencies, and operational patterns to create mines that could distinguish between specific vessel types with unprecedented accuracy.
Traditional mining operations scatter explosives randomly, hoping for chance encounters, Dr. Wells explained to Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal during a classified briefing. Our approach treats the ocean floor as a three-dimensional chessboard. Every mine placement is calculated to maximum effectiveness based on enemy movement patterns, harbor configurations, and behavioral psychology. The mines themselves represented a quantum leap in military technology. The Mark 9A magnetic mine contained sensors capable of detecting not just the presence of steel, but the specific magnetic signature of Japanese naval alloys. The acoustic variant could differentiate between the engine noise of a destroyer, cruiser, or battleship, waiting for targets that matched pre-programmed parameters. Most revolutionary of all was the Mark 12 intelligent mine, which incorporated primitive computing circuits that could count passing vessels, analyze their displacement patterns, and even estimate their speed and heading before deciding to detonate. Some mines were programmed to ignore the first 3 ships, others to wait for the 7th, and still others to activate only when specific acoustic and magnetic signatures appeared simultaneously. The B-29s of Morrison's squadron flew individual missions, approaching Japanese waters at different altitudes, speeds, and routes to avoid pattern recognition. Each aircraft carried 8 mines, precisely calibrated for specific harbor depths and tidal conditions. The crews had trained for 6 months on detailed scale models of Japanese naval facilities, learning to identify landmarks even in complete darkness. Master Sergeant Linda Thompson, Morrison's lead bombardier, had achieved an accuracy rate that amazed even her superiors. Using the AN-APS-15 radar system, she could place mines within 5 meters of their intended positions despite flying at 8,000 feet in total darkness. Her precision had turned mine-laying from an act of chance into a surgical procedure. We're not dropping mines, we're installing death on demand. Every mine we place will wait exactly where we put it until the right target appears. Then it will kill with mathematical certainty. Technical superiority. The technological gap between American and Japanese mine warfare capabilities was measured not in months or years, but in fundamental scientific understanding. While Japanese mines relied on simple contact detonation or basic magnetic influence, American mines incorporated electronic circuits that could perform complex calculations underwater. The Mark 9A magnetic mine, developed at the Naval Weapons Laboratory in China Lake, California, contained 67 discrete electronic components arranged in a waterproof housing no larger than a briefcase. The magnetic sensors could detect vessels at ranges up to 400 meters and distinguish between different classes of ships based on their unique magnetic signatures. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead electronics engineer, had created what amounted to an underwater computer capable of making life-and-death decisions autonomously. Even more sophisticated was the acoustic processing system developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories under contract to the Navy. The Mark 10 acoustic mine could isolate specific frequency ranges corresponding to Japanese engines, filtering out wave noise, marine life, and even American submarines operating in the same waters. The system had been trained using thousands of hours of recordings obtained by submarines infiltrating Japanese anchorages. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the project's military liaison, had overseen the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation of the war. American submarines had spent 18 months recording the audio signatures of every major Japanese warship, often risking detection to obtain high-quality audio samples. The data was processed by teams of acoustical engineers who created unique sound fingerprints for each vessel class. We can identify a Fubuki-class destroyer from a Kagero-class destroyer based on engine noise alone, Hayes reported to Admiral Ernest King. Our minds know the difference between a battleship and the heavy cruiser before the Japanese radar operators do. The pressure-sensitive Mark 12 mines represented the pinnacle of American engineering innovation. These devices measured minute changes in water pressure caused by passing vessels, calculating not just their size but their speed and heading. The pressure sensors were so sensitive they could detect a submarine running silent at 200 feet depth, yet sophisticated enough to ignore false signatures from schools of fish, marine life, or even American submarines operating in the same waters. The deployment patterns designed by Dr. Wells followed mathematical principles derived from operations research, a new field that applied statistical analysis to military problems. Rather than scattering mines randomly, each placement was calculated to maximize the probability of encountering specific target types while minimizing the risk to American forces. The harbor approaches to major Japanese naval bases were mapped with hydrographic precision. American submarines had conducted covert surveys measuring water depths, current patterns, and bottom composition. This data was fed into mechanical calculators operated by teams of Navy mathematicians who determined optimal mine placement for each harbor's unique characteristics. Captain Morrison's squadron had access to intelligence that would have astounded Japanese naval officers. Detailed harbor charts showing not just depth and bottom composition, but the exact locations of ammunition storage areas, fuel depots, and command bunkers. American reconnaissance had identified which piers were used by specific vessel types, which channels were favored for night departures, and even which anchorages were preferred by individual Japanese captains.
The systematic annihilation of Japanese naval power began with mathematical precision on the night of April 5, 1945. The heavy cruiser Shiranai, pride of the 7th Cruiser Division and veteran of 14 major engagements, became the first victim of what intelligence analysts would later call the most successful single-weapons deployment in naval history. Captain Emiko Hayashi had commanded Shiranui through the hellish battles of the Solomons Campaign, earning the Navy Cross and the personal commendation of Admiral Yamamoto himself. On the night of April 5th, she was conducting routine maintenance in Crimson Harbor's most secure anchorage, surrounded by submarine nets and anti-torpedo protection that had never been penetrated by enemy action. At 03:47 hours, a Mark 9A magnetic mine that had been resting on the harbor floor for 72 hours detected the distinctive magnetic signature of Shiranui's steel hull. The mine had been programmed to ignore smaller vessels. It had already allowed 3 destroyers and 2 submarines to pass overhead without triggering. But when the sensors identified the magnetic pattern specific to Mogami-class heavy cruisers, electronic circuits completed a firing sequence that detonated 800 pounds of Torpex explosive directly beneath the ship's magazine. The explosion was visible from the mountains 20 miles inland. Captain Hayashi died instantly along with 387 of her crew, including Lieutenant Commander Kazuko Sasaki, the fleet's most promising young navigation officer, and Chief Petty Officer Midori Takahashi, a veteran gunner's mate who had survived Pearl Harbor, Midway, and the Philippine Sea, only to perish in what she had believed were safe waters. The destroyer Kazehana met her end 12 hours later while attempting to investigate the Shiranui disaster. Commander Michiko Sato, one of the few female destroyer captains in the Imperial Navy, had been conducting a careful search pattern when her vessel triggered an acoustic mine programmed to respond to the specific engine frequency of Fubuki-class destroyers. The mine had been placed by Master Sergeant Thompson with surgical precision at the entrance to the main shipping channel. It had ignored 2 minesweepers and a submarine, waiting for the acoustic signature that matched its programming. When Kazehana's engines provided the exact frequency pattern, the mine detonated with such force that the destroyer broke in half, sinking in less than 90 seconds. Commander Sato's final radio transmission, recorded by harbor monitoring stations, became a haunting symbol of the new warfare. Unknown explosion amidships. Hull breach critical. We are sinking in sight of home. Tell my daughter. The transmission ended as Kazehana disappeared beneath the waves that had carried her through 4 years of war. Within the first week of sustained mining operations, Japanese naval losses mounted with terrifying efficiency. The light cruiser Sukiakari exploded while taking on ammunition at Mizuho Bay, killing her entire crew, including Captain Yuki Tanaka, who had been preparing for her wedding to a naval aviator stationed in Okinawa. The destroyer Asagiri disintegrated while departing for a rescue mission, taking with her Lieutenant Commander Rei Yamamoto and 198 sailors who had volunteered for what they knew was a dangerous assignment. Each loss followed the same horrifying pattern: sudden, catastrophic explosions in waters that had been swept from mines hours earlier. The mines seemed to possess an impossible intelligence, striking only at the most valuable targets while ignoring smaller vessels that posed no significant threat. Failed countermeasures, 7 to 9 minutes. Admiral Kenji Nakamura, Supreme Commander of Home Waters Defense, convened an emergency meeting of Japan's most experienced mine warfare specialists at his fortified headquarters beneath Tokyo Bay. The assembled officers represented 3 decades of naval engineering expertise, yet their collective knowledge seemed pathetically inadequate against the invisible enemy claiming their ships. Captain Sachiko Kimura, the Navy's leading authority on mine warfare, presented her analysis with the clinical precision that had earned her recognition throughout the fleet. She said, "The enemy mines demonstrate technological capabilities that exceed our current understanding by approximately 5 years. Their sensors are more sophisticated than our best detection equipment. Their fusing mechanisms appear to incorporate electronic computing devices that we lack the industrial capacity to reproduce." The traditional Japanese approach to mine clearing had served adequately against conventional weapons. Magnetic sweeps using powerful electromagnets to trigger mines from a safe distance, acoustic countermeasures involving noise-making devices, and visual inspection by experienced divers. Against American thinking mines, these methods proved worse than useless. They were deadly. The minesweeper Kuroshio, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Akane Watanabe, became the first victim of Japanese countermeasures. While conducting systematic magnetic sweeps in Wakaba Harbor, the vessel triggered a combination mine that had been programmed to ignore the electromagnetic signature of sweeping gear, but detonate when it detected the ship's own steel hull. The explosion killed 18 mine warfare specialists, including Petty Officer First Class Noriko Abe, who had cleared mines continuously since the war's beginning and had never lost a crew member to enemy action. "The mines are learning," reported Chief Engineer Yuriko Matsuda after examining fragments recovered from the Kuroshio disaster. "They distinguish between our sweeping equipment and our ships.
They know the difference between a minesweeper conducting operations and a destroyer on patrol. We are fighting weapons that think.
Desperate to stem the losses, Admiral Nakamura authorized increasingly dangerous countermeasures. Submarines were ordered to conduct underwater reconnaissance of suspected minefields despite the obvious risks. The submarine I-371, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Tomoko Suzuki, volunteered for a reconnaissance mission in Crimson Harbor, hoping to identify mine locations through periscope observation. I-371 never surfaced. A pressure-sensitive mine detected her passage at 90 feet depth and detonated with sufficient force to crush her hull instantly. All 53 crew members died, including Suzuki herself and Chief Petty Officer Masako Ito, the fleet's most experienced female sonar operator. The submarine that had successfully penetrated Pearl Harbor and survived 18 months of combat patrols was destroyed by a weapon she couldn't see, hear, or avoid. Japanese naval engineers attempted to develop electronic countermeasures based on captured mine fragments, but the technological gap proved insurmountable. The electronic circuits recovered from American mines contained components that Japanese industry couldn't manufacture. The magnetic sensors operated on principles that Japanese scientists understood theoretically but lacked the precision engineering to replicate. "We are attempting to fight tomorrow's war with yesterday's weapons," admitted Dr. Fusako Taniguchi, director of the Navy's Technical Research Division. The Americans have achieved a level of miniaturization and electronic sophistication that our most optimistic projections placed 10 years in the future. Growing realization. By April 25th, the scope of the catastrophe was becoming undeniable to even the most optimistic Japanese naval commanders. Captain Yamashita had watched her harbor transform from the nerve center of Japanese naval power into a collection of steel coffins floating on increasingly empty water. Ships that had terrorized Allied forces across the Pacific now sat motionless, their captains unwilling to risk the invisible death that lurked beneath familiar waters. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical losses. Commander Rei Matsumoto, who had witnessed the destruction of Shiranui, began experiencing what Navy medical officers termed harbor paralysis, a psychological condition that prevented experienced naval officers from ordering their ships to sea. Even vessels that hadn't been damaged sat idle, their crews infected by the knowledge that movement meant probable death. "The Americans have achieved something no enemy has accomplished in our naval history," reported Captain Sachiko Kimura in her confidential assessment to Admiral Nakamura. "They have made us afraid of our own waters. Our captains, who charged into battle at Midway and Guadalcanal without hesitation, now hesitate to leave harbor. We have lost our greatest strategic advantage, the aggressive spirit that has sustained the Imperial Navy for 70 years." The statistics compiled by naval intelligence painted a picture of systematic destruction that defied historical precedent. In 21 days, Japanese naval forces had lost more tonnage to mines than they had lost in the first 18 months of the war. The rate of destruction was accelerating as American mining operations expanded to smaller harbors and secondary bases. Lieutenant Commander Sayuri Ishikawa's final intelligence summary contained the admission that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "The American mining campaign has achieved strategic objectives that conventional naval warfare couldn't accomplish in years of combat. They have transformed our harbors from assets into liabilities, our territorial waters from sanctuaries into death traps. At current loss rates, the Imperial Navy will cease to function as an effective fighting force within 45 days. The meeting of senior naval commanders on April 26 marked the unofficial end of Japanese naval resistance. Admiral Nakamura, who had commanded destroyers at Pearl Harbor and cruisers at Midway, formally acknowledged what every officer present already knew. The Imperial Navy had been defeated not by superior tactics or overwhelming force, but by a weapon that turned the sea itself into their enemy. Gentlemen and ladies, Admiral Nakamura addressed the assembly, his use of the latter term acknowledging the unprecedented number of female officers who had risen to command positions as casualties mounted. We face an enemy who has solved the fundamental problem of naval warfare. They have found a way to sink our ships without risking their own. They have turned our greatest strength, our ability to operate from defended harbors, into our greatest weakness. Captain Yamashita watched the faces of her fellow commanders as the reality settled over them like a burial shroud. These were officers who had sailed into hell at Guadalcanal, who had fought desperately at the Philippine Sea, who had maintained discipline and courage through 4 years of increasingly hopeless battles. Now they sat in silence, contemplating the impossibility of their situation. But what the assembled naval officers didn't yet understand was the destruction of their fighting fleet was merely the opening movement of a larger symphony of strangulation. The B-29s that had spent a month proving they could eliminate Japanese naval power at will were about to demonstrate that they could starve an entire nation by extending their invisible warfare to every merchant vessel, fishing boat, and cargo ship that kept Japan's 72 million people alive. The minds that had claimed the pride of the Imperial Navy were about to teach the Japanese Empire that in modern warfare, the most devastating weapons are often those the enemy never sees coming and never sees at all.
British. The invisible weapons that had paralyzed the Imperial Navy in Part 1 were about to reveal their true purpose. What began as targeted strikes against warships was actually the opening phase of Operation Kraken's Net, a campaign designed not just to sink ships, but to starve an entire nation into submission. By May 15, 1945, Colonel Morrison's B-29s had shifted their focus from military targets to Japan's economic lifeline, the merchant fleet that carried rice from Korea, coal from Manchuria, and oil from the occupied territories. The same sophisticated minds that had destroyed the Imperial Navy now began claiming cargo vessels with ruthless efficiency. The freighter Yamakaze Maru, carrying 8,000 tons of desperately needed rice from Busan, triggered a pressure mine just 3 miles from Yokohama Harbor. Captain Midori Tanaka and her crew of 43 perished instantly, along with enough food to feed Tokyo for a week. The rice, mixed with seawater and diesel fuel, created a grotesque slick that stretched for miles, a floating monument to Japan's mounting desperation. Within days, shipping through major ports collapsed entirely. Insurance companies refused to cover vessels entering Japanese waters. Ship captains abandoned their posts rather than attempt voyages they knew would end in death. The port of Kobe, which had handled 400,000 tons of cargo monthly, processed only 15,000 tons in May. Warehouses sat empty while cities starved. Dr. Catherine Wells's calculations had been devastatingly accurate. By targeting both military and merchant vessels, the mining campaign created a psychological terror that paralyzed all maritime movement. "We didn't just sink their ships," she later wrote in her classified report. "We made them afraid to use their ships. Fear became our most effective weapon." Human cost: stories of survival and suffering. In the fishing village of Shirahama-Sato, 60-year-old Hanako Sato watched her son's boat burn on the horizon, victim of an acoustic mine that had mistaken his diesel engine for a military patrol craft. The Ebisu Maru, carrying sardines to feed Osaka's population, joined the growing list of civilian casualties in a war that no longer distinguished between combatants and non-combatants. The psychological impact on Japanese merchant crews proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Captain Yuki Nakamura, a veteran mariner who had sailed Asian waters for 30 years, suffered a complete nervous breakdown after witnessing 3 ships explode in a single convoy. "The sea has become our enemy," she told Navy psychiatrists. "Every wave could hide death. Every harbor entrance might be our tomb." Families of merchant sailors faced agonizing choices. The government offered triple wages for dangerous runs, but money meant nothing to widows. Mrs. Akiko Yamamoto refused to let her husband attempt the crucial career route. "I would rather starve than watch him sail to certain death." In Tokyo, civilian rationing fell to 800 calories per day. Children fainted in schools. Hospitals ran out of medicine as supply ships refused to attempt the journey from pharmaceutical plants in Kyushu. The elderly began dying not from bombing, but from malnutrition, silent victims of mines they never saw. The staggering numbers: complete economic collapse. The mathematics of Japan's defeat were written in sunken tonnage and empty stomachs. By June 1945, American mines had claimed 847 vessels, totaling 2.1 million tons, more shipping than Japan had lost in the previous 3 years of war combined. The efficiency was staggering. Each mine cost $2,800 to produce and deploy, yet sank an average of $18,000 worth of Japanese shipping. Coal imports from Manchuria fell 96%. Rice shipments from Korea dropped 89%. Oil tankers simply stopped attempting the journey from the Dutch East Indies. Japan's industrial production collapsed not from bombing, but from lack of raw materials that couldn't be transported through the mine-infested waters. The Iwata Steel Works, Japan's largest industrial complex, shut down completely in June when coal ships refused to dock at Shimonoseki Harbor. Without steel, aircraft production ceased. Tank manufacturing ended. Even the production of basic tools and farming equipment stopped. Desperate final measures. Admiral Nakamura authorized increasingly desperate countermeasures. Wooden-hulled fishing boats were pressed into service carrying vital supplies, but even these triggered the pressure-sensitive mines. Submarines attempted to ferry critical materials, but most never returned from their missions. In a final act of desperation, the Navy ordered its remaining destroyers to attempt supply runs to starving cities. The destroyer Hayate, commanded by Captain Sakuchi Watanabe, volunteered for a mission carrying medicine to plague-stricken Nagasaki. She struck a combination mine in the Kanman Strait, taking her entire crew and the medical supplies that might have saved thousands of civilian lives. By July, Japan had effectively ceased to function as a modern industrial nation. Cities that had withstood months of bombing were brought to their knees by the simple inability to move goods by sea. Resolution and hidden legacy. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, he cited the nation's inability to continue the war. Behind that inability lay empty harbors, starving cities, and the invisible weapons that had turned Japan's greatest strategic asset, its control of surrounding waters, into its ultimate vulnerability. The final tally was unprecedented in naval warfare. 1,247 vessels sunk or damaged by 18,500 mines deployed by only 180 B-29 sorties. Operation Kraken's Net had achieved what conventional naval warfare never could: the complete economic strangulation of an island empire.
Yet this devastating campaign remained largely unknown to the American public. No dramatic gun camera footage existed of mines sinking ships at night. No heroes emerged from electronic warfare conducted by radar and mathematics rather than courage and skill. Colonel Morrison and her crews received minor commendations for what was arguably the most successful bombing campaign of the war. Dr. Wells returned to MIT, her revolutionary mine technology classified for decades. The women who had fought and died in the final naval campaign, Captain Yamashita watching her harbor die, Commander Matsumoto witnessing the destruction of her fleet, Captain Hayashi perishing with her ship, became footnotes in a war that preferred more visible heroics. The invisible weapons that won the Pacific War proved Admiral Nimitz's prescient observation: the most effective weapons are often those the enemy never sees coming, and in this case, never sees at all.
Japan's defeat came not from the dramatic bombing raids that filled newspaper headlines, but from the silent, systematic strangulation accomplished by thinking minds that turned the sea itself into America's greatest ally. In the end, Japan surrendered not to superior firepower, but to hunger, isolation, and the terrible realization that their island empire had become their prison, surrounded by waters too dangerous to cross, too deadly to defend, and too essential to abandon.